Students, I'm so excited to have you with me today. I felt that I should give you this bonus lesson because we didn't deal with one aspect of Revelation, and a very important aspect, and that is resistance and the fact that there is a demonic attack that will come against you. And then I'm going to speak about the tests. By now you should have received all of the notes on the tests, and I'd like you to follow with me. But before you do, let's deal with that, because we've learned so much about Revelation. We've learned the positive aspect of it, and this is the positive aspect as well. I'm going to speak about the demonic, but I'm also going to speak about the dynamic. And I want to challenge you and to ask you, what do you see? Do you see the dynamic in the demonic, or do you only see the demonic when you're attacked or resisted? Do you only see the demonic aspect of the resistance and the attack? What do you actually see when you're attacked? It's very important. Demonic resistance leads to our persistence. Always. It should do anyway. And our persistence leads to God's assistance. So when you resisted, you're going to have to make a choice. You can either be passive, or you're going to rise up and you're going to be persistent and attack. Whether you like it or not, you've got to accept this fact. You're going to be resisted when you're moving forward and taking occupation of the revelation that God's revealed to you about your destiny. Over the years, as I was attacked, I'd always keep my eye and focus on the bad aspect of it. I'm being resisted and things are going wrong. Why are things going wrong in my life? What must I do about this? And eventually what I would do, I would begin to realize that every time I've been resisted, every time I'm attacked, something good has come out of it. And every time I've had some type of resistance, it's pushed me forward. It's pushed me closer. You know, I used to have meetings in Detroit, Michigan, and I would teach about the resistance, because I was resisted so much during my life, because a prophet has so much revelation. And even the Apostle Paul was attacked because of the amount of revelation that he had. The Bible speaks about the thorn in the flesh that he had because of this incredible amount of revelation he had. So when you are filled with revelation, you have constant attacks. And so you have the choices to give it up and say, look, I'm finished with this, or else move on and see the good in it, or something that's going to come out of it. So when I look back, I realized that this attack was doing something for me, not against me, even though the enemy wanted it wanted that attack to stop me and cause me to be passive and just give up. It's so easy to take that step. When we were in Detroit, I did a meeting one night, and I started singing this one rap. It went, the more that he attacks me, Satan, the more he resists me, he's pushing me closer to the promise of God. He's pushing me closer to the promise of God. That's what he's doing. He should be doing that, but a lot of people don't experience that. So today, when I'm attacked, I don't look to the demonic. I don't even pay them attention. I look to the dynamic. What is there? Okay, don't forget what I first taught you about revelation. Revelation, don't forget now, is a sudden impelling force or action that drives you forward and induces motion. Remember, I told you that that's what revelation does. It induces motion, which increases expression by inactivating the negative control system, which in turn activates the positive control system. So there we have it. What you have inside of you is a negative control system, a positive control system. Revelation deactivates or inactivates the negative and activates the positive. That's when you see the dynamic. So what is resistance, and why are we resisted so much? Resistance means that I am to be stopped at whatever cost, which means that I'm going to experience a breakthrough if I persist. Let's look at a few of these words that I've been using as I've been teaching this to you, because you're going to enter into a whole new world of understanding when you are attacked, and you're going to see, and you're going to say to yourself, there's a reason for this, and I know it's not because I did something wrong. Hello? The trouble is, we constantly blame ourselves for any kind of problem, any kind of catastrophe. Tempestuous weather comes in our life and we blame ourselves. I did something wrong. Well, that's not always the case. It was the case with Jonah, but it's not always the case, because even out of that, something good can happen. So let's not cast blame. What we got to do is look for the dynamic. So let's look at a few words that I've used. Persist. The word persist simply means to continue steadfastly in purpose and your course of action. To continue steadfastly. That's what persist means. Now I'm going to teach you something. You have to persist when this goes wrong, which means to continue steadfastly. Remember that word steadfastly, because you have to have steadfastness in purpose and your course of action, which means you have no confusion. I know exactly what to do. This enemy's coming against me now. I know exactly what to do against it. Now, let's go to the word dynamic. The word dynamic, what does that mean? A basic force that motivates and affects development and stability. Dynamite, let's use the word dynamite, or if you want to go back to the Greek, let's use the word dunamis. Dunamis is the word that they use for power. When the Holy Spirit came upon them on the day of Pentecost, there was a dunamis that came upon them, power. They were filled with dunamis. That word is dynamic or dynamite. And it's basically a force that motivates and affects development and stability. That's what dynamic is. So you've got to look for the dynamic, not the demonic, when it comes against you. The one thing your enemy wants is to cause instability. This can only happen if you become double-minded. Remember that now. The enemy looks at you and he says, this guy is stable, he's excited, he's motivated, he wants to move. Now, what can we do to stop him from advancing and getting where he's supposed to go? Your enemy wants instability, because you become double-minded and persuaded and say, I don't believe in myself anymore. And when you start believing in yourself and you start believing in your revelation, then you've got a problem, my friend. So we have to understand that he wants double-mindedness. He wants instability, so you won't be steadfast in your action, in your course of action, and in your purpose. Remember what James said in the Bible, a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. So now we understand what persistence is. We have to persist. Resistance must bring about persistence, which brings about God's assistance. Now, a double-minded man cannot think one way. He's thinking many ways. I'll get out this way. I'll do this. I've done that wrong. We don't want that. The enemy wants instability. So the third word I used, the second word I used was dynamic. We've understood what dynamic is now. Now, let's move to the third word. That is demonic. You know, we use that word so loosely. So, that's demonic, and that's a demon coming against me and all this kind of stuff. But what does demonic really mean? Demonic is an unforeseen circumstance that emerges, causing frenzy, distress, rage, confusion, fear, and in many cases, passivity. What is passivity? It's the fear of taking action. So demonic actually means it's an unforeseen circumstance. You never thought this was going to happen. That emerges, and it comes so quickly that it causes frenzy, distress, rage, fear, anxiety, confusion, and in many cases, as I said, passivity, because passivity is one of the greatest enemies that'll stop you from getting to your destiny. Remember that. Because this is a very important time in your life. You are entering into the place where you actually believe that what you were created for is going to come to pass. And now suddenly you're into tempestuous weather, or circumstances, I should say. And it's unforeseen. And so there's frenzy, distress, rage, anger, but passivity is what he wants, which means you are now fearful of taking action. You are fearful of going forward. And I want to share this with you. I'm not a computer fundi, and I don't claim to be, but I did a little bit of study on this dynamic aspect of it, because it's so interesting that in a computer, dynamic memory must be constantly refreshed to avoid losing data. And a computer's data storage is affected by the passage of time, or rather, the presence or absence of power. So what I'm saying to you is, in a computer, a dynamic memory, it's called dynamic memory, it has to be constantly refreshed to avoid losing data, because the data storage is affected by the passage of time. As time goes on and there's nothing going on, it's affected by it, but it has to have the presence of power, because the absence of power is a problem. Okay, why are you telling me that, Kim? Because you have God's promises and words stored up inside of you. Remember, when you were 6 years of age, you got a word from God. When you were 10, he spoke to you. When you were 15 at school, something happened and you had a promise from God. Whether you call it God or not, there's something inside of you that knows there's a future for me. And you have all of this stored up. God gave you a promise. God gave you a word. and it's stored up. But if those promises lay dormant, you could lose the data. So what happens is that God uses various circumstances to refresh that data. Isn't that pretty cool? I thought it was, because when I'm thinking to myself, there's stuff inside of me that I've forgotten about. And a circumstance will suddenly revive that. That presence of power will suddenly bring it out of its storage. And so dynamically allocated memory, that's sort of what it's called. Dynamically allocated memory exists until it is released. So it's inside of you, either by the programmer, God, or by the garbage collector. And you know who he is. So that's how it's collected. The enemy wants your promise. He wants to steal it from your memory. He wants to take it away from you so that you will never think about it again. So what God does, he sends you into he sends a surge of power, whether it comes through a demonic activity or whatever, and suddenly it's bringing it to life because it's dormant. Passivity is dormancy. That's dormancy. That's what it means, to be dormant. So we don't want passive people. We want people that when the enemy arises, you still have your course of action, you're still going. I'll show you a few things later on as we progress in this lesson. So what is the bottom line? Is resistance a negative or a positive? Unless we remain passive, it is a negative. In other words, if you are passive, it's a negative. If we allow the shift to take place, which is the dynamic, moving you from one level to the next, if we allow the shift to take place and act, it is a positive. So the dynamic in it means it's going to shift you from one dimension to the next dimension. That's what it means. Resistance creates a dynamic, which means a shift from one level to the next. Got you. Now you understand there's a dynamic in every attack that comes against you. But Kim, you don't understand. I've got problems with money, and we all have those situations. I'm talking about a specific, unforeseen circumstance that comes up, and you don't know how to deal with it. And you start blaming yourself. Stop that immediately, and let's move on to action. What is the next course of action? Well, God, you got something in this. I'm going to find out what it is. And Satan is a loser all the way around, unless we remain passive. Now, I'm going to read to you a scripture in Acts chapter 27, verse 7 to 36. I'm going to take my time with this teaching because I want to show you a few things, how our forefathers and the leaders that we have followed. Apostle Paul was one of our greatest leaders because he wrote 3/4 of the New Testament. And in Acts chapter 27, he has a perception. Remember, I told you, you start with you perceive something first. Then you have a revelation, which I've taught you. And that's important that you understand, because I'm going to show you something in Acts chapter 27, verse 7. Let's read it. When we had sailed slowly many days, this is verse 7. Now, Paul speaking, or at least the writer is telling the story, and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. The wind not permitting us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmon. Passing it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near the city of Lasea. Now, when much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them. Now remember, Paul is actually a prisoner, and he's being put onto a ship, and he says to them, men, in verse 10, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster. Students, write that down, because it doesn't. Does that make him a false apostle? Does that make him a false prophet? No, because his perception was correct in the beginning. But now it changes. Things change because they don't listen to him. So let's talk about the perception that he had. He says, men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster. Listen to what he says, with much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also our lives. In other words, Paul is saying, I've perceived by the Spirit that this is going to be a disaster, this voyage. We're going to lose the ship, the cargo, and our lives. Now, verse 11, nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. Well, that's pretty normal. Who goes on a perception of a man who is a prisoner with a reputation, I might add, of being correct. Verse 12, and because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also. Now, let me move to verse 13 very quickly, and let's just get through this to show you what actually happened. When the south wind, they went north and so on, and when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their desire, putting out to sea, they sailed close to Crete. But not long after, a tempestuous headwind arose. Now, they're not expecting this, called Euroclydon, whatever it's called. So when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, we let her drive, and running under the shelter of an island called Clauda, we secured the skiff with difficulty. So they secured the. Now, when they had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship. Now, they're all fighting like crazy to keep the ship afloat. Verse 18, and because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. Verse 19, on the third day we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. Now, this has happened in a lot of cases, and it's given up in families, in nations, and when you get to that point, that's when you need a revelation. Verse 21, here it comes. But after a long abstinence from food, Paul stood in the midst of them and said, men, you should have listened to me. Okay, he's rubbing it in. And not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. Now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you. Wait a bit. His first perception said that there was going to be a loss of life. So what happened? Did he change his prophecy? It was a perception, remember. He perceived it. But God can change that. How did God change it? Look at this. He says, not one of us will lose our lives, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of God, to whom I belong, and whom I serve, the God who I serve, saying, do not be afraid, Paul, you must be brought before Caesar. Whoa! Let's stop right there. Think about this for a minute. They cannot go under. The ship cannot sink for one reason and one reason only. And the angel tells him, you, Paul, you have to get to Caesar. So God will keep every one of these alive because your revelation has not been completed and you've not fulfilled your destiny. So he's saying, because of me, all you guys are going to live. Very the opposite to Jonah. Now, this is now in the New Testament. It's so exciting to read this because he says, do not be afraid. He said, the angel says, you must be brought before Caesar. And indeed, God has granted you all those who sail you. Well, they're going to live because of Paul. Therefore, take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told. However, we must run aground on a certain island. You know what I want to say? If this was anywhere else, we'd have the heresy hunters saying, okay, we got a false prophet here. He said, we were all going to lose our lives, and now we are not. He's changed his mind. No, he didn't change his mind. The people never listened. And so the circumstance changed, and God said, okay, I'm going to change this whole perception that you had. Here's my revelation to you. We're going to make it. The men are going to make it. The ship won't make it, but we're going to make it. So he said, we must run aground on a certain island. And when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. Beautiful, isn't that? Here's the issue. He's given them a word. He says, now let's take bread together and have communion and give thanks to God in the presence of them. When he had broken it, he began to eat. Then they were all encouraged and also took food themselves. Isn't that incredible? A revelation from God will give you a procedure in the midst of an attack or resistance. A revelation from God will give you a procedure. What is that? A course of action. He'll give it to you in the midst of your attack. Now, that's what you're going to look for. What is the dynamic? It's a revelation that comes to you. This is what I want you to do. That's what Paul did. And he was in a tremendous, what happened out of there was even more incredible is that they do actually get to an island. All the men are saved. And the natives of the island are very, very kind to them. And it's cold, so Paul makes a fire. And a serpent comes out of the fire and bites Paul and holds him on his hand. And all of the people on the island say, oh my God, this is a curse. The guy's going to die. The gods are not happy with him. And Paul, now hold on again, remember something, this is an attack that comes against him. There's a serpent that's biting his hand while he's making the fire. Because that's what fire does. When you bring the power of the Spirit into a place, you're going to have all kinds of demonic forces come out. Here's a perfect example of it. The serpent is biting him. The natives are saying, he's cursed, he's going to die. This is a curse from God. And of course, they're very superstitious. And what does Paul do? Shakes it off. They're expecting him to die. He ignores them because he knows there's a dynamic. In the middle of this problem, there's a dynamic that's coming out of it. He doesn't die. And suddenly, all the natives of the island call him a god. And what does he do? He speaks to them about the Lord Jesus Christ. You got it. That's it. That's the key right there. A revelation will make you do something that has never been done before. That's where the dynamic comes in. With every revelation comes a test. Now, let me read something else to you before we go through the 15 tests very quickly. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 9, a great door has opened for me, and there are many adversaries. Now, if you think about what he just said there, it agrees with everything I've taught you. That when you get a revelation, a door opens for you so you can go higher, but there are many adversaries. So if you think you're going to get away with it, you're not. Sorry, bad news, you're not going to get away with it, okay? So let's move on now. We've learned a lot as it is. This was a surprise lesson, but also it is a lesson that I believe that will help you when it comes to the resistance, because you're going to be filled with revelation, which means you're going to have many attacks. That doesn't mean you're going to get sick or specifically anything. It's an unforeseen circumstance. Remember that, okay? Let's go on then. So when God gives you a revelation, what happens? He's opening a door. And Paul said, a great door is open for me, and there are many adversaries. Okay? He actually spoke about the monster in the one area. He called it a monster, a beast that he had to deal with. So, and he dealt with it, and he is still spoken about today. When you pass your tests, every time you pass a test, you move to a higher level, and there's more blessing. Some people say, Kim, how long have you done this? Okay, I've done this for over 30 years. By the way, nobody's given me any 30-year celebration for my 30 years in the ministry. But you know what? We don't care about it because I'm going to be an old man, and I'm going to be a great old man. And I'm going to be preaching. I'm going to be doing this when I'm 80 years of age, and it's going to be unbelievable because I'm never going to retire. I don't need to because I love this. This is the greatest thing in the world. But Kim, you mean you're going to go through all these attacks? Because every time you overcome an attack, every time you overcome a resistance and you get through it, there's a reward, people. And so people say, well, you've been doing this so long, and has God blessed you? Yes, he blesses me all the time. And sometimes we'll have nothing, and the next thing we got a lot. Just the way it is. And to me, it's the most exciting life to live in revelation. Imagine John on the Isle of Patmos, and he's got all these revelations coming, and he's seeing all these things. It's incredible. Anyway, let's talk about the test now, because you've got the paper. This is what I put together many years ago, and I'll go through it, and I'm not going to go through each one personally because it's going to take us too long. I think a lot of it is self-explanatory. You understand it when you read it. You can look up scriptures. But here are the tests that you will experience with every revelation that God gives you, and of course, every door that opens during your life, which ultimately leads you to your destiny and beyond. These are the phases that you're going to go through. Let's talk about this. Open your document that I send you, which should be in my handwriting. You may not understand a lot of it. And if that's the original one that you got, the original copy, you'll see that there's watermarks all over it and everything. And, during those years, I would teach, I would weep, I would, there'd be perspiration. It's just great to have all those old, handwritten notes that I had those years ago. And this is the first one that I spoke about, which is the test that you'll go through to start with, and that's called the time test. Joseph went through a time test, and the Bible speaks about when his time had been fulfilled, it came to pass. And a lot of times we will be in, for instance, Joseph, when he got the promise, or he saw his future and his destiny in that dream, he spoke about it. And in speaking about it, there was I would call a demonic attack where his brothers threw him into a pit, sold him to the Ishmaelites, but there was a dynamic in it because it moved him forward. Where was he going to? He's going to Egypt. His ultimate destiny was Egypt. Now where's he going? He goes to Potiphar's home. Gets to Potiphar's home. Seems pretty okay. He's doing a good job. He's prospering. He becomes the manager of the household. And suddenly he's accused of rape. Quick, unforeseen circumstance. He runs. And the woman that's accusing him of rape grabs the garment from him and says, look, he tried to rape me. It's a lie. It's demonic. It's an unforeseen circumstance. What happened? He got closer to his promise. He gets to Egypt. He's in jail. He's in prison. So that's no fun, Kim. But what's going to happen is, all of this, this speaks of the dynamic that I'm teaching you. But he's being tested because it's a time test. Isn't this my time, God? You gave me a promise. Why isn't this happening now? And look, even worse, I'm accused of rape. I'll never get there. And so he has to measure the time. He has to know, this is not my time now. Gets into the prison, and eventually what happens? He wakes up a prisoner, and he goes to bed the vice president of Egypt. Think about that. Now that's what I call dynamic. But it's a time test, because some people give up and say, oh, I'm not going to wait the rest of my life for this. I'm tired of waiting. And even Sarah, when she waited, and Abraham, you think about 100 years of age, and was literally impossible. And they obviously said at that point, this is never going to happen. But he had faith and believed it. And the day came when the angels visited them and said, go and tell Sarah about this time next year she's going to have a child. Well, she'd heard so many promises and so many exhortations from her servants and her handmaidens and everything. That's why she started laughing. The Bible says she laughed, I don't know, one or two. And the angel heard her laughing and said, why is she laughing? Well, she denied it and tells a lie while God's speaking to her. God, it's unbelievable. She tells a lie, and then God said, yes, but you did laugh. Didn't tell her he's going to punish her and kill her because she laughed at him. Can you blame her? 100 years of age, and he tells you you're going to have a child. I would laugh as well. But anyway, that's the time test. You don't know your time. You must wait it out. There's a time for everything. Time and a season. What's the next test? The word test. Where the word that you have inside of you, the revelation of the promise, will be tested. And it will be tested in so many ways. Well, do you really believe that what God said to you will come to pass? Well, I do. God said it, so I believe it. You're going to stand before the President of the United States. You told us that God's going to send you to nations, and look, you still have nothing, they said about me. Well, that was the word test. And I would say, he said so, and if he said so, it's going to come to pass. And so I passed my test. The third one is the character test. You know what? You cannot do this without character. There's the fruits of the Spirit and there are gifts of the Spirit. Gifts are given to you, but fruits grow in your life. And so it has the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit, Galatians chapter 5, you can read about it, what the fruits of the Spirit are: love, joy, peace, and so on. All these have to grow. And as they grow in your life, so God increases your expression. It's very important that you understand that you have to have character in this deal. And so God's going to build your character. And if there's a lack of character, you say, well, your character's never going to change. God will build your character. But there will be tests to get you to that place where you can handle it. And things like humility, very important issue. Serving. Jesus was a servant. He washed Simon Peter's feet, and so on. That's what I want you to see in this whole issue, that your character must line up with the anointing that God has given for your life. Then we have number 4, the motivation test. You will lose motivation. You will lose your inspiration, I promise you. You won't feel good about yourselves at times. You won't feel so excited about your revelation because things are not going well. Can you imagine Elijah on the mountain, and he stands and calls fire from heaven? Can you imagine that? And fire comes from heaven. And God just answers his prayer right there and sends rain. And he accelerates, and suddenly Jezebel rises up and pops his balloon and says, I'm going to make you as one of these prophets by tomorrow, this time. The prophets had just died. And so she basically said, I'm going to kill you. She was the queen of Israel, albeit a witch, but she was a queen. And when she spoke that word, what happened to Elijah? Lost all of his motivation, ran for, 40 miles, and got to a place. And when he was there, he stood before God and said, actually, he was in a state of depression. And the Spirit eventually came to him and said, Elijah, what are you doing here? Well, what do you mean, what am I doing here? I ran away, You're supposed to be in the hub of activity. This thing that Jezebel did is actually a dynamic. It's going to take you to a higher place. What do you mean a higher place? I'm the only prophet. I'm the one that prophesied. Suddenly this pride comes out of him. So his motivation is being tested. The motivation test to see if you, and so he's got no motivation whatsoever. He's being tested now, and he's saying, there's no way I can do this. There's no way I can do this. And he said, God, I'm the only one. What happened when he lost his motivation? When he lost his motivation, pride came into the picture. Isolation, independence. He said, I alone. And God said, hey, by the way, I've got several thousand reserved in your place. So don't think of it. You're the only one here. I don't want to hear that stuff. Get back to Jezebel. Get back to that place, and I'll give you Elisha who will take your place. I'll give you a double portion, and I'll put a king who deserves to be a king in Israel. Can you imagine that? This is all motivation. You see that? You're going to be, I've lost my motivation. I've got no inspiration. Yes, you do. And God will bring it back to you, but you have to be in the place where you're supposed to be. So your motivation will be tested. And when you're in that place, just do the right thing. And that is to go into prayer and say, God, I want to remind myself of who I am in God. Remember what happened to King David? When he was anointed as king, suddenly he's being chased by the king of Israel, and the entire army are trying to kill him, and he's in the mountains running away. What happens to him? What happens to David? David gets into a cave. He lifts up his hands. He says, my heart is fixed. My heart is fixed, O God. I will sing praise. Yes, I will sing praise. Do you really think he felt like doing that? Do you think that David really felt the inspiration and the motivation to sing praise when he was ready to be taken captive by King Saul, who hated him because he was jealous of him? And David gets into a cave and he says, my heart is fixed. You know what the word fixed there is? What did I teach you early on? Steadfastness. My heart is steadfast. I will not lose focus. I know who I am. I know I'm the King of Israel. I will not move away and take focus off that. I'm not double-minded, so I'm going to sing praise. Even if I don't do it, I will, which means he made himself do it. He willed himself to do it. That's what you got to do. And that's one of the biggest tests you're going to have. And all of you know that because you have depression, you give up, you read things, in the newspaper, you see things on the news, and you say, oh no, you lose your motivation. So my suggestion is get alone, lift up your hands and say, God, I want my heart to be steadfast. So I'm going to sing praise. I know that helped you. I know that's going to bless you. I know that's going to do something for you, because right now, some of you are watching me and saying, Kim, even on this course, I was excited and motivated. Now I'm losing motivation. I'm losing it. No, you're not. You're going to get into a cave. I don't care how bad it is. And you're going to change your environment by praising God. And guess what will happen? Your motivation will return. That's what happens when you worship Him. Okay, let's move on. Number 5. The servant test. The servant test. What is the servant? Well, I'm a king and I'm a priest and yeah, you are, but you're also a servant. Fortunately, in this kingdom, a servant is actually a leader. Jesus took the attitude of a servant, and he served even though he was a leader. So he had no inferiority complex because he was a servant. You have to have a servant's heart. Remember something it says in Hosea that I will reveal my secrets, and I will do nothing until I reveal my secret to my prophets, the servants of God. Well, it's something like he says, my prophets, my servants, the prophets. That's what he says. And he uses the word servants there because prophets and anybody that has a revelation has to serve that to others. So you're going to have your servant heart tested. Elisha served Elijah for many, many years and became the double portion carrier. There are rewards in serving, by the way. If you think it's just carrying things for people and cleaning up, by the way, every time you serve somebody else, you are qualifying yourself to receive a portion from that person's anointing, gift, and their life. Don't ever forget that. And he said, well, that shouldn't be my reason. No, it shouldn't be your reason, but you need to understand that you're doing it for Christ. And so when pride comes in, it says, I don't want to have to serve anymore. Even today, people will tell you this, that come into my home, that when we're having dinner, I will get up and I will serve people. Whether I'm serving them food, I'll make food for them, I'll serve them wine or water or whatever, or turn the water into wine. But I'll always serve them. And because I want to always remind myself that I am actually a servant of God. That's what my name is, a servant of God. Now, I'm also a king. I'm also a ruler. I also have a certain amount of prestige, and people know who I am. Fame, you want to call it, if you want, yes. But with fame comes a lot of problems and a lot of tests as well. And I don't desire too much fame. Even though if God gives it to me, I know I'll have enough character to handle that. And the way that I keep myself in check is to serve. So many times people will see me do that. I'll help somebody else that's supposed to be helping me. But it's more to it than that. But you understand, once David served Saul, Elijah served Elijah, and of course David became the king out of that. Number 6, what is the 6th test you'll go through? The wilderness test. Remember, we're speaking about David now, that he was in the wilderness for so many years, and yet he was able to motivate himself. There'll be a time that you'll be in the wilderness, and in that time, you'll be tested. So, Kim, I don't want to be in the wilderness. You probably are now already. You don't even know it, some of you. Thing is that there will be a time where you're alone. You feel that nobody's with you. You're in a wilderness situation. But remember something, in the wilderness, God provides water. He provides bread. He does incredible things in the wilderness as well. And so if you look at what happened with the children of Israel in the wilderness, incredible things happen. A wilderness experience is not always a bad experience. It could be incredible. You'll see different things. You'll see things from a different view. But you will be tested, and there will be a time where you feel like you're alone. And you'll get through that because God will be close to you. So, number 7 is the misunderstanding test. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, 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 yes. Do we know about that, folks? We know about being misunderstood. If anybody does, it's me. And I suppose many of you have Googled me and see the things that people say, and it's all misunderstanding. Now, some of it's deliberate to make me look stupid and to misquote me or to discredit the prophets and the prophets of the Lord, because people, that's what they do. And so in the misunderstanding test, you'll want to fight back. When you're criticized and you are misunderstood, you want to defend yourself. And you know what I found over the years? That you don't have to defend yourself. God will ultimately bring about victory for you and justice. You just got to be patient enough, which we're coming to next, which is one I have failed so many times. I said to God, just give up on me and give me extra credits for something else, because I'm never going to pass this one. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. The misunderstanding test, I have passed many times. I've been through it a few times, and I now failed it many times, which means it's come back. Misunderstanding test means you're going to be misunderstood, and what are you supposed to do? Fight back? No. You don't fight back. You say, God, it's in your hands. When King David was being chased by when David, the anointed king, was chased by King Saul, and he had the opportunity to defend himself when he was able to get alone with Saul. Saul didn't even know that David was there. Saul went to relieve himself, and when David was in the cave with Saul, he couldn't kill him. He couldn't defend himself, so he cut off a piece of Saul's garment. And when he brought it back to his friends and the warriors that were with him, they said, "Where is Saul's head?" Because they wanted David to kill Saul so David could become the king, because he was the anointed king. And David said, "I couldn't do it." He said, "I couldn't do it because I cut off a piece of his robe." And the Bible says that the men wanted to kill him because they were sick of being in the wilderness and they knew that he was the king. And all David did was cut a piece of his clothing off, of Saul's, and he came back and said, "Even when I did that, my heart smote me. I was so hurt. I felt that I'd done something wrong because I touched God's anointed." Now that's a great attitude to have. When somebody's hurt you. Now I've had experience in my life where, and Jane and I have had this time and time again, where I've been misunderstood and we've just left it and not tried to defend ourselves, and years go by where we've not defended ourselves and vindication has come. And let me tell you something, it's the sweetest, sweetest feeling. It's such an incredible feeling when that vindication comes. It's just unbelievable. And people have come and said sorry, they apologize. 10 years later, they're saying, we said this, and we just forgive them, because that's what makes character. So what's the next test I'm telling you about? The patience test. I don't think I've met many patient people in my life, and the few that I have met, I greatly honor, because it's incredible to be patient. And I am not a patient person, and I'm extremely impatient, so I failed that one over and over and over. But I've also passed it many times, and I'm getting used to the fact that, I have to wait and be patient. But you will be tested with your patience where you're waiting and say, well, I've waited for so long. Why is this taking so long to happen? My, whatever it is, you just hold on. Don't be too impatient, because you might act out of impatience and produce an Ishmael. Now that happened with Abraham. See, out of impatience, saying, well, we've got to have a son. Hagar produced Ishmael, and that was a mistake, son of the flesh. So even though God turned it around, I want to show you that acting out of impatience can cause many fleshly things to come out. So I want you to understand that. So patience, you're going to have that test. And every time you get a revelation, you're going to go through one of these tests, because there's a higher level of it, And so also God wants to make you an example to others. Okay, then you have number 9, the frustration test. Anybody been there? Frustrated. Okay, we all been there. And so you're going to have that, where you're going to be frustrated. You have to pass that test and say, I'm not going to worry about this. I am frustrated, but I'm going to get it in check, and I'm not going to act. These tests are all about acting out of. You don't want to act out of frustration. You don't want to act out of impatience, out of discouragement. You don't act. What you do is you wait. That's why the patience test is probably the most important. But I'm saying this so that you understand these tests are so that it can produce the character in you, so that you can be example to younger people. And when they see you in the state where you say, well, shouldn't you be just tearing your hair out and being angry? You say, no, because I've learned over the years that God will vindicate me. And so that's one of the reasons. Also, He doesn't want you to act out of it, because it could cause a lot of trouble. So we have the frustration test. You're going to be frustrated. Just get over it. The discouragement test. We all know about that. Discouragement. Great discouragement. I don't know. And, that means you lose courage. Just beware that you don't lose courage. Discouragement is going to come to you, and when it does, you say to yourself, I know that the enemy is rising up against me to cause me to be discouraged, so I'll act out of discouragement. The test is that you don't act while you're discouraged. Just stand still and see the salvation of God. God will come in for you. Okay, next test, the warfare. Hello? Spoken to you about the fact that there is resistance. That's what we spoke about earlier on. And in a warfare, in a time of war, you have to be very skillful in hearing God's voice. Every time David heard from God, and when there was a war going on, he was being resisted, and he said, shall I attack? First thing you need to do, don't just go ahead and attack, or don't just go ahead and say, well, I'm going to fight this thing. Sometimes you don't need to fight. Sometimes you just wait and see. And God said to David, you may go ahead and fight. There may have been a time where He told him, no, stand still. Just don't do anything right now. And so warfare, as I spoke earlier on, is about resistance. And I've already taught you how to overcome that and to pass that test. Then number 12, the self-will test. Very important. When you want to do it yourself, nobody else is working out, well, I'm going to do it. God's not even working for me, so I'm going to work it out myself. So what you have is a problem, because now you start acting out of self. Self never does any good. Let me tell you something. When you have been called by God, everything's about Him. It's all about Him. You are privileged enough to participate in this great venture and adventure. And so it's not self-will, it's His will. Remember what Lucifer said over and over. He said it, I will. 5 times. He said, I will be as the Most High God. I will sit above the stars of God. And on the mount of the congregation, I will. 5 times he said, I will. And he never did. He never achieved one of those things, because that was His will, instead of saying, your will be done. Jesus Christ taught us in the Lord's Prayer, and He said, you are to pray, Our Father who is in heaven, and give Him glory. Hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth, in my life, as it is in heaven. So there will be a time where you want to do it yourself, not working out. Again, you're acting out of self-will. And that stubbornness, and what happens in the end is it fails. I've had so many people that I've counseled and said, well, what happened? He said, well, it just didn't seem to work it out, so I just went in there and did it. And that's a very dangerous thing. So you will be tested. Again, you don't act out of that not determination, but your self-will. That's what I'm saying. It's His will. Number 13 is the vision test. God gave you a vision. You know you're going to get there. I don't care what it is. Whether he said to you, you're going to be another Bill Gates, or you're going to be another Eminem, and you're going to touch people's lives, whatever it is. He's given you a promise, and it's actually a vision. You've perceived it. That vision is going to be tested. Things are going to happen contrary to the vision. And you're going to say, but I thought this was, hold on. You're going through a test. And what God wants to see is, do you really believe in the vision? That's what these tests are all about. Do you really believe, self-will, do you really believe that my will be done? Do you really believe that the vision I gave you is of God? Well, it doesn't seem to work. That's a test. Don't worry. But God wants to see, do you really believe? The word test, do you really believe it? And so on. And that's why it's important that you understand when you're going through this, just remember God's watching your action. He's watching your reaction, which you shouldn't be having. He's watching your action to see if you really believe this. And you know the prophets of old went through a lot of frustration. Even Jeremiah went through that. He said, you know what? He said to God, you've deceived me. He said, you've made me prophesy things, and the high priest took Jeremiah the prophet and put him in chains, hung him on a wall in a prison, and humiliated him. And when he let him out, Jeremiah said to God, you have induced me, you have persuaded me to do this, and I wasn't happy about doing it. That's your will. You made me do that. Now I'm never going to speak your word again. And we know what happened. He did end up doing that because there was like a fire shut up in his bones. Point I'm trying to make is, even he went through the frustration test and the different tests. And even though he sort of failed, he made it in the end. And he spoke God's word again. But the one that I want to speak about before we close, and I pray for you, is the obedience test. And then the final one I'll do. Number 14 is the obedience test. You know, the obedience test is where God checks to see if you will be obedient. Because you see, ultimately, it all boils down to this. You have to be obedient to get to the next place. And so when your obedience will be tested, meaning that God will say, okay, do this now. And you don't want to do it. For instance, if I'm, or you are going to a place where you're really gaining momentum and you're getting sort of notoriety and, getting authority and power, and suddenly God says, I want you to go down to a prison there, and I want you to go and speak to the prisoners. And that's not my ministry, Lord. That's not what you called me to. You just failed the obedience test, because God's telling you, I want to see if you can still be obedient in some of these smaller things that may not be important to you, but they're very important to me. I've done that before. I was in Holland, in the Netherlands once, and I just done these great meetings, and everybody it was so powerful. And I was in the airport, and the Spirit of the Lord, I had very little money in those years, and I was carrying back very little money. And the Lord spoke to me, and he said to me I was to go over to a family and to take the balance of my offering and to give it to them. It was a small thing. It was a little bit of money. But I knew as I did it, I'd passed the obedience test. That's one thing you're going to be tested with all the time. And watch out, just because you're way up there and you start getting big stuff and whatever, just watch out that you don't say, well, that's too menial for me to do. Jesus healed, resurrected, raised from the dead Lazarus and people, but he could also go to the one person that was in the tree and say, I'm going to have a meal with you. Or he went to Simon Peter's mother-in-law and healed her of a little fever. My point being that there are little things that God's going to test you with to see if you can still be obedient so you can hear his voice. Is that incredible? 15, the promotion test. Now, all of you are saying, what do you mean promotion test? How can you be tested with promotion? I mean, I want to be promoted. I want to get but sometimes you'll say no to it. You see, what will happen is you'll get opportunities, and then also you'll have doors open that are from God. Sometimes an opportunity is not an open door from God. And so what the enemy will do is he'll act like this is promotion for you, but it's not actually promotion. And it's not from God. The story I can tell you a number of stories. The story I'd like to share with you about this is when Elisha prayed for the Syrian leader who had leprosy. And Elisha said, the king, of course, when he was healed, said, I have donkeys and I have flour and wheat and barley worth probably hundreds of tens of thousands of dollars. I don't know, but it was worth a lot. And Elisha said, thank you very much, but I don't want it. I mean, at that point in time, Elisha could have been promoted to whatever level of financial stability. We don't know what he was going through, but he turned it down. I don't think I've heard of anybody turning down something like that. I did it once before. I was given, and this is in 1979, a man walked in and wrote a check out for $20-something thousand. Now, that was a lot of money then. It's a lot of money today. But, I mean, then it was worth probably $100,000 today, if not more. And he said, I want you to start a church. He said, I'm going to get you this, so here's the money. And I was so thrilled. He said, but then he said to me, but I want you to do this, and I want you to do that, and I want you to do this, and you're not allowed to do this. And I took the check, and I pushed it back. Even though I could have still taken it and worked over, God said, do not touch that. But it's promoting me to another level. No, it's not. It's not. You will be tested in these areas, my dear warriors, my dear students of the prophet. You've been a delight to be with. And oftentimes, that's the test that you'll probably pass when you get older, because when promotion comes to me now, I don't want it. I say, no. And what happens is you take the right steps. When the door opens and it's God, and it's a promotion from God, you will feel good about it. Others will just be opportunities, and you'll say, no, I thank you very much. And people scratch their head when I say to them, I don't want that. And I've had some of my managers and stuff get mad with me because I said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to do this. And it's because I've been through it, and I know what it's like to fail when I think it's promotion from God, but it's not. So you've done fabulously. And through your life, you're going to go through these various tests over and over. And you get acquainted with afterwards. You know, I know this is testing me now. But you will go through these various phases. Don't think of it as resistance. Think of it as opportunity. And today, I want to thank you for being the finest students in the world. Of course, I can't touch you. I can't be with you. But I've been to meetings all over the country, and I've waved my hands to you, and I've said, how many of you have attended the School of the Prophet? And you've waved your hands with big smiles on your face. And it's just beautiful to see you and connect with you. And I want to thank you. And I pray that God would fill you with more revelation, and so that you touch the untouchable and reach the unreachable, and change the world that you're living in, change the environment, whether you're a singer or you're a writer or you're a designer or you're an athlete, whatever it is, in your world you can make a difference when you know who He is. And that's the final revelation, the ultimate revelation. It's Jesus Christ. That's who it is. And He's there when you are born. He's there during your life. He's there when you die. And always available to you, and you want to give that to somebody else. So, Lord, I thank you for the greatness of your wisdom. I thank you for the greatness of your faithfulness. I pray that every one of these incredible students would live to see the day that they've dreamed about would come to pass. And, Lord, that no matter what the resistance, that they would overcome, that, Lord, they'd be steadfast, they'd stand. And in standing, Lord, they'd overcome. I break the power of double-mindedness, the great discouragement that comes against them. Let them keep their eye focused on the author and finisher of their faith, the author and finisher of their vision, the author and finisher of their destiny. And Lord, I thank you for that. And I pray now, God, cast your mantle upon them, fill them with your great Spirit. And Lord, I pray that as they go from this lesson and from this time, and this period that we've had together, that you would send them at the highways and byways, and they'd touch people's lives all over. And I release your presence upon their lives in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. God bless you.